Parker Schnabel thought he knew every way mining could betray you. Broken machines, bad ground, costly mistakes that only reveal themselves when it's already too late. After years in the Klondike, he believed surprises were behind him. He was wrong. While Parker focused on reshuffling crews and opening a new cut, a move was unfolding far from the cameras, quiet, deliberate, and unauthorized. Chris Doumitt, the man Parker trusted more than almost anyone, went back to ground that had already been written off. No meetings, no approval, just a drill and a hunch. What came out of that ground didn't make sense. Not flakes, not traces, thick pay streaks, gold-rich layers sitting exactly where the data said there should be nothing. Ground Parker had abandoned years ago was suddenly screaming value, and Chris didn't report it. Instead, he secured it, his name, his claim, his discovery. Then the atmosphere shifted. Equipment started moving without explanation. Test results stayed off the books. Whispers spread faster than proof. Because if what people were saying was true, Chris Doumitt hadn't just found gold. He'd quietly claimed ground rumored to be worth up to $45 million. Parker had no idea. Before we go any further, hit like and subscribe, because what happens next sends shockwaves through the gold rush world, and no one saw it coming. Chris had always been the calm presence in Parker's operation. The steady one. The guy who kept things moving when chaos hit. But this season, something changed, and almost everyone missed it at first. The signs were subtle, buried inside ordinary footage. While the crew crowded around survey maps and planning boards, Chris was often standing apart, studying claim layouts alone. His markings didn't line up with any cuts on the schedule. At first, viewers assumed it was just editing, random shots stitched in without meaning. Then, it kept happening. Chris wasn't with the wash plant. He wasn't with the loaders. He wasn't even near Parker. Instead, he was walking tree lines, pacing abandoned ground, scanning the dirt like it was telling him secrets no one else could hear. Online chatter exploded. One mechanic mentioned Chris had borrowed a piece of equipment, but there was no record of it, no authorization, no paperwork. The machine vanished overnight and reappeared before dawn, like nothing happened. Others claimed they'd seen Chris parked near the far boundary of the claim, land Parker had flagged years ago and never touched again. When Parker was asked about it, he barely reacted. "Chris is just checking boundaries," he said, without looking up. But something in his voice felt wrong. It wasn't certainty, it was dismissal. The kind you use when you believe something isn't worth thinking about. Except Chris wasn't checking boundaries. He was mapping pay, and he was doing it alone. The first real crack in the story came from someone completely outside Parker's circle. A contractor near Dawson uploaded a batch of core sample images without realizing what he'd uncovered. At a glance, they looked ordinary. Another forgotten section of Yukon dirt. But then people noticed something. Every sheet was marked with the same initials, CD, Chris Doumitt, not as a witness, but as the requester. That alone raised eyebrows, but the location raised alarms. The samples came from ground Parker had abandoned 3 seasons earlier, land considered so barren, no one even bothered scouting it anymore. And yet the results were staggering. High concentrations of fine gold, consistent readings across multiple depths, a clean trend that didn't match erosion patterns of a dead channel. Even stranger, the tests were ordered under strict confidentiality. The contractor admitted it, the geologist confirmed it, and the only name attached to that request was Chris Doumitt. At that point, the question wasn't why Chris was testing the ground, it was how long he'd been doing it, and what he'd already found. Then things escalated. Late one night, viewers scanning public satellite feeds noticed something that shouldn't exist. On a stretch of abandoned land, miles from any active operation, machinery was moving, working. No permits, no recorded equipment, no crews scheduled. At 2 in the morning, only one explanation made sense. People zoomed in. Screenshots flooded Reddit and Facebook. Grainy, pixelated, but unmistakable. A pickup truck sat beside the machine. Chris Doumitt's truck. Same dents, same grill guard, same custom decals added season after season. He was out there alone, running equipment on land no one had touched in years. When Parker tried calling him, Chris didn't answer. Not that night, not the next day, not for 2 full days. During that same window, Parker's crew noticed something worse. One of their dozers was gone. It hadn't been signed out. No instructions, no notice. But the tracks told the story. Straight across a frozen bench and into darkness. Chris had taken it. When the satellite images updated again, the truth hit hard. A massive trench carved deep into the earth, cut with precision only an experienced miner could pull off solo. Chris had opened a hidden channel he'd been tracking for months, and he never wanted anyone to see it. Not Parker, not the crew, not the cameras, not anyone. When the dust finally settled, one detail stood out above everything else. That ground wasn't dead. The exposed layers glowed with color no abandoned channel should ever show. And whatever Chris pulled from that cut, he didn't leave it behind. Because when he returned to camp, he looked like he'd walked straight out of a glittering sandstorm. At first, nobody noticed. Miners come back filthy every day. But Mitch froze. He stepped closer, brushed his hand across Chris's jacket, and stared at his fingers when they came away sparkling. This wasn't dirt, not mica, not drill dust. It was ultrafine placer gold, so light, so pure, it clung to fabric like powder. The kind of gold that floats when disturbed. Mitch had seen it before, years ago, on a bench Parker had sworn was completely played out, so worthless they never even reclaimed it. The same bench Chris had been quietly inspecting whenever he thought no one was watching. Chris said nothing. He just muttered that he was checking something, hung up his jacket, and walked away. But his silence said everything. Mitch looked at Parker, waiting for him to demand answers. Instead, Parker just stared at the jacket, at the gold dust embedded deep in the seams, gold that didn't belong to any ground they were supposed to be mining. And in that moment, the realization finally set in. Something massive had been happening right under his nose. He never said anything, but anyone who'd worked with him long enough could tell his mind was racing. Gold like that doesn't come from random dirt. It only comes from ancient, untouched channels. Channels that didn't line up with a single cut they were actively mining. And if Chris had uncovered gold that pure, that fine, that concentrated, then it meant one thing. Something alive was still running underground in a place everyone had already declared dead. That suspicion crossed the point of denial later that afternoon. A mechanic, moving equipment nearby, slid open the bed of Chris's truck and stopped cold. Tucked neatly against the side were 5 plastic buckets, lids sealed tight, stacked with intention. Buckets themselves weren't unusual. Everyone used them for testing. But sealed buckets? That wasn't routine. That was secrecy. Curiosity won. He cracked the first lid, and his breath caught instantly. Bright, unmistakable color stared back at him. Thick veins of gold, threaded through dark gravel. Not a hopeful glint, not a single flake. Real pieces, the kind you see without washing. Scoop a handful, and multiple chunks would flash in plain sight. He opened the next bucket. Same thing. Then another. Every single one was loaded with richer gravel than Parker's active cut produced in an entire hour of running pay. And the gravel itself was wrong. Wrong texture, wrong density, wrong color. This wasn't from their pit. It was older, heavier, tighter. The kind of ancient pay layer most miners never see once in their entire career. But what truly stunned him was the mineral signature. Rounded quartz, mixed with heavy magnetite and compacted clay, an unmistakable blend. It didn't match anything they were currently mining. It matched something else, something Parker used to talk about in quiet moments. The pay zone he lost years earlier after permits expired and disputes turned ugly. Ground so legendary it was spoken about like folklore. The mythical $45 million channel Parker never got to properly mine. And somehow, impossibly, Chris had gravel from that exact zone sitting in buckets in his truck. The news moved through camp in minutes. Whispers followed Parker wherever he walked. People kept their heads down, pretending to work, pretending nothing was wrong, because everyone knew something massive was unfolding without Parker's knowledge, something Chris had gone to great lengths to hide. By now, this wasn't scouting, it wasn't curiosity, it was execution, quiet, calculated, and expensive. Then came the moment everything slipped. A clerk from the Dawson claim office stopped by with routine paperwork and casually mentioned she'd seen Chris earlier that morning, alone, at dawn, filing documents, not as part of Parker's operation. As primary operator, the room went dead silent. Primary operator. You only file that way when you're claiming land for yourself. The clerk didn't notice the shock she'd caused. She kept talking, explaining Chris had been in a hurry, carefully double-checking coordinates, making sure every detail lined up perfectly. Funny thing, she said, the coordinates looked familiar. She'd seen them before. Old maps, old files, old disputes. The same disputed pay zone Parker lost years ago. Someone had just claimed it. The final blow landed an hour later when Parker opened his inbox. Not an approval, a rejection. The claim he'd quietly tried to refile, just in case that ground ever reopened, had been denied. Filed too late. Someone beat him by 8 minutes. 8 minutes between holding onto a dream and losing it forever. Whoever filed first now legally owned the pay zone Parker wanted more than anything else. And that someone was Chris. He'd done it silently, strategically, before sunrise, before the crew woke, before anyone suspected he was even thinking about new ground. The realization hit Parker all at once. Chris hadn't just spotted an opening. He'd uncovered a loophole, reopened abandoned ground, and moved faster than anyone could react. No partners, no investors, no crew, just Chris. A stack of sealed buckets filled with proof, and an ultra-fine gold channel hiding beneath land everyone else had dismissed as worthless. And the real shock wasn't the buckets or the filings, it was the timeline. Chris had been tracking this for months, maybe longer, testing gravels, reading layers, following subtle clues, and keeping every piece hidden until the exact moment he was ready to move. That gold-dusted jacket wasn't an accident. It was evidence. Evidence of a living channel beneath dead ground. A channel Parker never believed existed, but Chris did. And now he owned it. Once the paperwork was filed, Chris didn't return to camp. He didn't speak to Parker. He didn't talk to the cameras. He went straight back to the trench he'd cut under cover of darkness. The same one satellite images had caught him digging alone. And what he pulled from that cut changed everything that followed. Word traveled fast, too fast. Parker quickly learned where Chris was and what he was doing. He tracked him down near the edge of the old bench, frost crunching under his boots, breath sharp with anger. There was no warm-up. Parker demanded answers. Why was Chris working behind his back? Taking equipment? Filing claims in secret? Hauling test gravel from ground Parker had abandoned years ago? Chris didn't raise his voice, didn't flinch. He looked at Parker the way you look at someone who ignored their own warning. "You stopped believing in that ground," he said quietly. The calm hit harder than any shout. Parker fired back, said the channel was dead, the numbers never worked, all they ever pulled was patchy color and fading returns. Chris shook his head. "You were digging the wrong layer," he said. "You never pushed past the false bedrock." The words stopped Parker cold. False bedrock. The trap every miner fears. The layer that convinces you the gold is gone, when the real pay is sitting just beneath it. Inches away. If Chris was right, it meant Parker walked away just short of untouched gold. The tension between them tightened like a steel cable. Parker demanded proof. Chris didn't argue. He opened his phone, swiped, held it out. The screen showed massive sheets of untouched pay, layer after layer, stacked clean and compact like pages waiting to be read. Dense gravel glowing with gold flecks, even through the dim phone light. An entire hidden fortune beneath the ground Parker abandoned. And the worst part? Chris had known for weeks. Before Parker could respond, Chris was already done talking. He wasn't there to debate the past. He had a test wash to run. With the trench wide enough for a loader, Chris hauled a small batch of his secret gravel to a borrowed wash plant just beyond the tree line. Not a full operation, just enough to see if the numbers held. When the plant roared to life, its low growl echoed across the valley. And with it came the heavy realization settling in Parker's chest. Whatever came out of that wash plant was about to change everything. What if Chris wasn't guessing? What if the so-called false bedrock wasn't a theory at all, but the answer everyone missed? When the mats finally came out, even Chris couldn't mask what crossed his face. This wasn't color. This wasn't trace gold. These were ounces, thick, brilliant, almost unbelievable ounces. The kind of cleanup miners talk about for years. The kind most only witness once in a lifetime, if they're lucky. Someone who wasn't supposed to be there filmed it on a shaking phone. You could hear his breathing as he zoomed in, hands unsteady, capturing a solid ribbon of gold collecting along the riffles. He uploaded it immediately. No waiting, no filtering. Within hours, the clip exploded across forums, group chats, and mining circles. Analysts froze frames, counted flakes, compared structure and hue. Veteran miners weighed in. Geologists chimed up. And the conclusion sent shockwaves through the Yukon. If that channel stayed consistent, it wasn't a $45 million deposit. It was bigger, much bigger. That's when everything unraveled. One morning, Parker's crew arrived at the main site and noticed something strange. The equipment lineup looked thinner. A loader was gone. A dozer missing. A fuel truck relocated. No signs of theft. No alarms. Just absence. At first, they assumed it was routine movement, a scheduling mix-up. Then they checked the GPS logs. Every missing machine had been transferred to Chris's newly registered claim. Cleanly, quietly, purposefully. This wasn't confusion. It was coordination. When Parker confronted his operators, no one denied it. They admitted Chris had asked for help. Not as a boss, not with authority, but as someone they trusted, someone they believed in. He told them he needed a few hands to get something started. They didn't realize until later what they were stepping into. This wasn't helping out. It was joining something new. The first real fracture in Parker's operation since he inherited his father's empire. The moment Parker grasped the scale of it, his anger ignited. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't about secret buckets or midnight digging. Chris wasn't rebelling. He was separating, taking equipment, taking manpower, taking momentum. As Parker stormed through camp, the timeline snapped into focus. The quiet scouting trips, the unexplained absences, the sealed buckets, the tests. Every move had been deliberate, leading to one inevitable outcome: Chris's own cut. A cut he trusted enough to risk everything on. And then came the reveal. Chris wasn't winging it. He had coordinates marked, machines staged, a lean crew committed to standing beside him. This wasn't poaching. This was construction of something he believed would prove that the legendary pay zone hadn't been exhausted, just misunderstood. The very ground Parker dismissed now stood at the center of the greatest challenge of his career, delivered by someone who had once stood at his side. As Chris prepared the independent cut, word spread faster than he could contain it. By the time hoses were locked and bolts tightened, he stood beside a wash plant, pieced together from borrowed parts and reclaimed gear. Around him were miners willing to gamble their paychecks on his vision. No speech, no ceremony, just a nod, and he brought the plant to life. Belts snapped, sluices rattled. The trench he'd carved alone in darkness fed its first load of pay. Even before the gravel hit the hopper, flashes of gold caught the morning sun. Coarse, ancient pieces trapped inside compacted layers untouched for decades. When the plant shut down and the mats were peeled back, the reaction was immediate. A veteran miner, someone hardened by years of disappointment, stepped forward, stunned. He said it out loud before anyone else could. He hadn't seen gold like that since the old days. Thick flakes, heavy pieces, nugget-rich gravel that carried weight in your hands. Real gold, living gold. Chris didn't celebrate. No smiles, no cheers. He dried the gold, weighed it, bagged it, calm, methodical, almost routine. But that calm wasn't modesty. The gold was always there. It just needed someone willing to trust the earth enough to find it. And now, with an entire pay zone roaring under his name, Chris's rise forced the Yukon and Parker to face a future no one saw coming.